What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Travis. This is TWA Motorsports, and today we're doing some exciting stuff. So we are going to be working on the Trans Am. Yes, the Trans Am. And as you know, guys, we now have two Trans Ams. If you guys didn't catch that video, I bought my son one, or my son sold some stuff and bought his own, I guess, however you want to look at it. But today, we've got a few other parts that I want to put on this motor, but then my plan, guys, is I'm supposed to have my transmission back in a day or two, all of which is going to try to hopefully go down in this video. We are going to hook the transmission to the motor. We're going to try to set the motor on the stand, and we're going to try to shove this thing under the car and make sure that everything fits. At least that is the goal. But before we do that, I got two new things that I want to put on that motor that I'm really excited about. And honestly, guys, I splurged a little bit here. I needed an alternator. I decided to go with Power Master. It seemed to have pretty good reviews. It's not the same one that I used originally on the motor that came out of this car, but that one was out of stock. So we're gonna give this one a shot. I think it's 165 amp. I will try to list it in the description down below. Let's see, maybe it's bigger than that. Maybe oh no, it's a 165. So bigger than the factory. The factory's a 105. So, you know, we're gonna have a little bit of additional electronics. I'm not planning on loading this thing up, but I may have a boost gauge in there. And then we got an ATI balancer. So why not use the stock balancer? Well, if I had a lot of faith in the stock balancer, I would, guys. But the fact is, even though it came off a 60,000 mile motor, it came off the motor that came out of my son's Camaro. There's little cracks in the rubber and stuff, and you cannot get a GM factory replacement. Now, you can get a Dorman, but there's been some horror stories about the Dorman flying apart, and yeah, I don't want to have that happen. And I didn't want to go with an underdrive pulley like a lot of the other companies make, because the smaller the pulley, the less actual harmonic balancing you get. So the bigger the pulley, or the stock size pulley, actually does the best at dampening the vibrations. Chose to go with the big dog ATI, and guys, I've used this on my ZR1. It is kind of a pain to install because it's multi-piece, but it's the best out there. And I chose for the steel. They make a steel aluminum. I chose for the steel, all steel one, because I want the most harmonics dampened out of that drivetrain as possible. I think it helps with engine longevity and whatnot. So we're gonna start by putting the alternator on, which we're gonna pop out of this box. Now, obviously we're not hooking up any wiring, but let's get this thing uncovered and start putting some of these parts on. Now, one interesting thing I'm gonna have to look up, but if you guys notice, this is a nice powder coated black, looks really, really good. But it has obviously a couple, hey dummy, this is where you plug in the power, and it's saying disconnect your battery. Obviously, guys, disconnect your battery. I'm just gonna put this, I don't wanna leave this stuff on. I'll take that off, but I noticed on the front side, so this is your power hookup, and then of course you got your plug, your 4-wire plug on the top there, and I'll leave that plug on for now as well. Actually, you know what? I think I'm gonna take that thing off. I have to get a screwdriver, but there's a negative. Check this out. There's an additional, it says negative ground terminal, use same ground gauge wire as positive. I don't know what the deal is with that. But either way, 15 millimeters is what we need to use to take these brackets out. And then we have a 10 that comes in from the back I didn't put in the last video. But let me go ahead and get all these stickers and stuff off. We'll get these bolts out and get this thing on, hopefully. I may have to run an additional wire. I'll have to do some research on that. Never seen that before. I had to knock this guy, I took the bolts out, but I had to knock this out a little. I guess so when you tighten it down, it kind of cinches that washer down, but this thing should fit just like the factory. The bottom looks like it will, and the top as well. And remember, we have that 10 millimeter that comes in from the back, and I didn't tighten this all the way up, this guy right here, because I knew that we'd probably have a little bit of movement there. So we're gonna go ahead and get it in place. I think that's, oh no, it's a little longer than that actually. Wrong one. You don't have to necessarily have that, but we're gonna try to put it in. And then these get torqued to 37. Now this is just the fronts. The back one, don't put that much on it. I generally just snug it down I'm sure there's a separate torque spec for it, but I'm not sure what it is, honestly, guys. And it's not a bad time to go ahead and torque down this again. So 37 on all of these 15 millimeters. Now that we got everything torqued down, we're gonna move on to the crank pulley that I was showing you, which is this guy here. And guys, this is, you could try to knock this thing on, but good luck. It's not gonna happen. I have an installer tool, and I really think you need one of these. If you don't have one, probably not a bad idea to just get one. I thread this in until it stops. So like right there, we'll thread it back just a little bit, I think. Go in a little further. And this pulls it on, as opposed to trying to knock it on or use your old bolt to put it on. I don't like doing it that way. So what I do is I pull it on with this, and once we get this snug, you want to get it down as far as you can, and then I'm gonna switch. I like to use adjustable end wrenches for this, just because I want to make sure it's going on. I try to get it started, as you can see, and then we're gonna use this guy to help drag it on. So this center section has a little washer in it. Oh man, we can go a little further. But at any rate, this right here pulls this onto the crank as opposed to like your threads, and I like to make sure that it's starting straight. Looks like it is. Seems to be starting pretty straight. I also like to sometimes back this off and then screw this down a little further if it'll go. Yeah, that's probably good enough. So we'll keep turning until this thing is all the way seated. You can see that it's built, it has a keyway in it. Obviously I'm using the stock crank. I don't have a keyway. No real sense in trying to put a keyway. Well, your aftermarket cranks will come with a keyway. Good news, guys. Got it on there. Now I gotta take it back off. This is why you read the instructions, and you know, look guys, I could probably cut this out of the video and you never notice. I did not read the instructions. This guy right here goes on the back before you press that on. So stupid me didn't do that. Now what that means is I've got to pull this off. Now I do have a puller and it's not that big a deal, but it's just like, dadgummit, you know? And then of course, you know, once we're finished, this guy here will go on the front, you know, like that. And alignment wise, it looks like we're pretty close. I mean, that's not all the way on, but anyway, we got to get this thing back off now, which sucks. But hey, what do you do? So I'll get it back off, and then we'll put that back on the back. I just kind of want to make sure that this stuff lines up here. I was looking. We'll get it back on the back, and then we'll put it back on. Now we're going to try it the correct way with the pulley on the back. It says engine side, so you know which way it goes. We're going to put it back on again, and hopefully we want to take it off again. Oh man, guys, I'm telling you, if it was easy, everybody'd do it. I actually think a guy could probably assemble this off the car, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this loose, and we're going to drag this thing back on, and then once we get it on, then we will worry about putting the bolts in, because they all kind of have to go in a certain way. Now that we've got that on, I guess actually I could have taken this back off. I've got it seated all the way. We could take this out. Holy cow. Get this guy out of place. And look, there's 6 holes on this pulley, which I really wish they would have just done 3. You'll know if you've got the right one because the bolt will only thread into 3 of the 6. So you can see how we're threaded in like that. So we know we've got that lined up. Now what I'm going to do, since we've got it lined up, is we're going to attempt to set this guy into place. There's an offset hole. I went ahead and set these recessed ones in to the pulley just to make sure that we were putting it on the right way. So now we're going to attempt to get it lined up. Which may take a little doing. Holy cow. What are the odds that I put it on the correct way? I don't buy it. So these guys with the washers go into the pulley. They go all the way through the hub, through the front, and then they thread into that back pulley. Well, that's where we're gonna start. We're gonna start with those. And since there's no keyway on this crank, I know there's a thing here that says offset hole, but it only lines up one way. We'll just see. Once we get a couple of those started, then we can start these guys. Well, I said that. We'll get these started. Yeah, I think it's just gonna take a little bit of movement. And man, that's just not lining up real well, guys. We may spin it. What I may do is I may spin it a little more. Maybe there is a hole that's a little bit different than the rest of them. We'll keep trying on the front until we get it correct. Get them ran down, just hand tight with this, and we'll crisscross here, making sure we pull that thing up against it. Nice. Starting to set flush now. All right, I'll come back with torque specs in just 1 second. Let me get these ran the rest of the way down. So for torque specs, and actually guys, this is a T40 Plus, not a T40, which is a completely different bit. Our flat ones, our countersunk ones, they go to, and they already have Loctite on them, and we're gonna crisscross pattern, but they go to 16 foot-pounds. And then the other ones, so the outers here, I need to pull those back out because they didn't have any Loctite. I'm gonna put some Loctite on them. They need to go to 120 inch-pounds. Now that we've got this on, if you guys noticed, like I said, it had a keyway in it. Well, we're not gonna be using a keyway because we're using the stock crankshaft. So what they say to do is to fill that opening with some high temperature silicone. And the reason you need to do that is because there's a potential oil comes through that. And so there's a potential it could leak past the washer that we're gonna be putting in next. So I've got an ARP bolt. Instead of using the factory one, I wanted to get a little nicer one. And so this comes with some, assembly lube. Even though it's saying to put RTV on the washer. So I'm gonna double check that, but for sure we've got to put some silicone in that opening there, which will be, I think we can probably reach in there and do that. It shouldn't be too bad. But once we do that, then we can go ahead and start talking about putting the bolt in. I am going to have to put my, well, shoot, I don't have a flywheel on this, so that ought to be interesting because I can't torque it without the flywheel on. And I can't put the flywheel on with it on the engine stand. So we'll just have to see what our next option is since I don't have it off the engine stand yet. What we may do is we may just put it in place. I don't know, we'll just have to see. I actually found out that I can sneak the flex plate back into place without taking this off the engine stand. So I've got it lined up. Guys, there's an alignment hole here. You can barely see it, it's right up there. I'm gonna be able to put these guys back in. So I'm using the factory bolts and I am gonna use a little bit of blue Loctite. Nothing crazy here. And we're going to torque these things back down. Now guys, there is a motor side and a transmission side. The flywheel actually tells you which goes where. Now, how are we gonna torque these down? You're probably wondering. Well, they go to 15 the first pass, and then 37, and then 74. So we have a crow's foot that I think I can sneak in here and manage to get this done. These are 15 millimeter, I believe. And we need to alternate. So we're gonna go like top, bottom. And what I may do is try to spin the motor over so I can get to each one. And then I may mark them as I go. I don't know if you guys have seen like the paint pens and stuff that people mark these with, but a lot of people will mark stuff as they torque it. I've got it all torqued, so 15, 37, 74 alternating, okay? This one on this side, opposite on the top, just like you'd put on a wheel. And you can see my marks. I marked one black mark after I went through each one, another black mark through it on the second pass, and then a silver mark for the last pass to make sure that we got it all. So that needed to be in place so we could torque down the actual pulley up front. So what I'm gonna do, guys, is now that that's in place, I'm gonna grab my flywheel locking tool. We're gonna thread it up in here, and then we're gonna go to the front. We're gonna put silicone in that opening. Remember, it's keyed, and they say, oh, I've got the ARP bolt in there actually right now, but that's the bolt that I'm using. I'll take that out, but where it's keyed, we need to put some there. And then it's kind of, the instructions are a little odd because ATI says to do it one way, using RTV and some red thread locker on the end of the bolt. ARP says do it a different way with the different torque specs. I'm gonna go with the method that ATI says, and that's the method that I'm going to use. Look, guys, they've tested it as well, and so I'm gonna go with what they have as far as torque specs, which we'll talk about when we get to that point. But let me get my flywheel tool in, get this out, and we'll get some silicone in that opening for the keyway. So, I don't know if you guys can see, I put some silicone, some high temp silicone in that. And the ATI instructions say to put high temp silicone on both sides of the washer. I'm gonna do that as well instead of using the ARP stuff. And then we are going to grab some red Loctite and put on our ARP bolt. I don't know where I put it, but either way, we'll grab it, put some Loctite, red Loctite on it. And then, guys, we're gonna torque away. We're all loaded up. You can see the red Loctite, you can see the silicone. Guys, we are gonna put this thing in here and hope for the best. Got that flywheel locking tool in there. This is a 27 millimeter if you're going with the one that I went with. So, look, we're gonna have to put quite a bit on it. I'm gonna grab the instructions real quick again and make sure, but we gotta get it really, really tight. Let me grab the instructions. I want to show you guys the difference between the two. Go ahead and run that the rest of the way down. I wanted to say, all right, so check this out. This is the ARP instructions, and it says 235 foot-pounds, and use their assembly lube, right, that comes with it. But if you go to the ATI, it says use red Loctite, 262, which is what I just put on it, and go to 230. Applying high temp RTV to both sides of the washer prior to installation. I'm going with the ATI. Let's get it torqued. Guys, that's a lot of torque. I had him hold it. Remember my engine stand, the bolt broke off. So what the tightness that we have right here is what we have until I get a nut welded on this to back that out. But I had him holding on this T-bar back here because the motor was rolling over. That's how much torque you're putting on it. So we at least got that on. So it's been a while since I started this video, but I've been waiting on this right here. So these are the new rockers that I got from the WS6 store. And guys, they have a different style design. You know, the trunnion upgrade is pretty popular. You can push out this center bearing and get rid of all those needle bearings, but this one is actually a caged bearing, and it seems to be pretty popular. Look, you don't have those like snap rings on the outside. And so I decided to go with this. It comes with a completely new rocker and rocker stud that's supposed to be a little stronger. I don't know whether it is or not, but this is a stock one here, and you can see the rotating spot, like the fulcrum here. If you had a pretty substantial size cam, you would be hitting, you know, that's the whole point of the trunnion, is for one, to get rid of those needle bearings, but then, you know, if you have a cam with a pretty good size lift, it can only go so far, right? So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna unpackage all these, and we're gonna get them on the trays, or the stands, the rocker stands, and we're gonna get them over there on the motor. And I've got a couple different sizes of push rods. I think I know what size I'm gonna need, but we'll just have to see when we go through this. I just need to open all this up, get these kind of lined up where I want them, and then we are gonna move them over to the motor. So here's what I'm doing. I've got them all on. You can see I put them on. I've kind of threaded them in, but I'm doing the test to make sure that our push rod's the right size. I've got a 735 in here. I've taken the spark plugs out. I've rotated the motor to where, I haven't done this in the past, guys, but I've kind of been spooked. I had a couple buddies that have ran the threads out. So you want to make sure that the piston or the cam is on the heel of the cam, so it's not in the lift portion, in the lift when you're tightening or loosening. So I'm going to go down until there's 0 lash here. And I don't know if my fat fingers will fit in there, but we're going to go down until it's what I consider snug with 2 fingers. And there's no lash. There's some side, oh, there is still. So I don't think a 3.5 is going to be long enough. I mean, you can have some side-to-side play like that, but we still got room in the push rod. So I'm gonna switch over to the 740s that I ordered, which I thought I was gonna need anyway, but I may have to order some longer. I may have to go to 745s. Swapped over to those 740s, and now we're good. So here's what I'm gonna do. We're gonna test this. Almost 1 turn. That's crazy that you might be able to even get away with the 730, 73, 75. They don't sell a ton of different options. I mean, you can get them in whatever length you want if you special order them, but 740s I think are the ticket here, guys. So here's what I'm gonna do. We're gonna take this all back apart. I know I'm not showing you this test. There's a lot of videos out there on that, on how to test for proper push rod length. So I'm just kind of vaguely going over it. So you're ultimately looking for less than 2 turns to get it snug, which we're definitely there. And we have no lash when it's snug down with like 2 fingers. I'm basically using the Richard Holder method. There's several other, technical ways to measure this, but we'll get this out of the way. I'm gonna go grab all the push rods. We'll put those in. And we should be good to maybe start assembling. So I'm actually gonna do a little oil on these. Cleaned them all off. I mean, they're brand new. Just wanna make sure that they're fitting where they're supposed to go. Make sure they line up in that. Good. And you'll be able to tell a little more if you've got them where they need to be. I mean, it's important to do it now because otherwise you're gonna have to take the rocker stand back out of the way. They kind of naturally want to fit in a certain spot. But they will go to the side of the cup. When I say cup, that lifter tray. So you want to try to make sure that you're doing it right. I've got so much on my hands now, we can probably just use what's on my hand. I'm gonna do the other side as well. And then we'll be ready to put the rockers in place. Got them all on there, got them tightened up. You can see I used a little bit of assembly lube underneath the rocker right here. I also put a little bit where it rides on that rocker stand. I don't know if it's necessary. I dabbed a little up here too. So at this point, I'm gonna get the other side on and then we're gonna torque them down, but I wanna do the same method. Like I want the cam on base circle or the heel of the cam in order to tighten them down, right? So we're gonna spin the motor over, see which ones move. When they stop moving, we'll tighten those down, spin it again, tighten the remaining. Now that we got them both on, I'm going to start torquing them to 22 foot-pounds. I'm only torquing the ones that are, the cylinder is on the heel of the cam, like I said before. So you can kind of see ones that are rocked back or rocked open, and go from there. And then we'll rotate the motor. So I'm gonna be going back and forth torquing these, and I'll probably go over them a second time. The other thing I'm doing is trying to keep them lined up on top of the valve. Sometimes they wanna walk a little bit, which is fine. I mean, they'll move a little bit, but you don't want them to be like that, you know. So let me get this finished up and then we'll be ready for valve covers. Got them all torqued down, so now I'm gonna use some brake clean and clean off the mating surface for the valve covers. Do that on both sides, and then I've got new gaskets and new seals for the bolts, because you know the bolts go through the center of the valve cover. Just want to make sure that we got a good surface here. And I had my painter paint the valve covers black, so they look really nice. I'm gonna go grab them real quick and we'll set them in place. So I got my new valve cover gaskets here. I'm gonna press those in. And then this is what I was talking about for the bolts, because a lot of times you'll get some leaking there. So it's a good idea to replace those, especially if you got an older, you know, an older valve cover that hasn't ever had that replaced. These are kind of a pain to get on. I'm using the stock bolts, but you do have to kind of force them over. I cleaned the bolts up as good as I could. And so now we got 3 more of these, well, actually 7 more. And then I pushed the gasket. I didn't show you guys that as far as the valve cover gasket. Just make sure that it's nice and straight. Go around it a couple times, making sure it's seated properly. But let's get these things on. You can see I went back and forth whether I should do black or red. And ultimately, guys, I thought we'd just do black. I had them red before, you guys know, on the other motor that we put in my son's Camaro. And I painted those myself and they just looked terrible. And so I wanted some good quality paint on these. So like I said, I took these to my painter and said, hey, make these look as pretty as you can. Now you're only gonna see, you know, just certain sections of it because, you know, majority of it's covered up with the rocker or the coil packs, but still. All right, let's get these things snug down. Trying to like to start in the middle and work my way out. I don't remember the torque specs on these. I'll have to look it up real quick. Let me look up the torque specs. In the meantime, I'm going to install the other one. We'll come back and get them torqued down. These things don't go very tight. 106 inch-pounds, which makes sense. I like to start in the middle, work my way out. There it is. So we'll do this, and then I don't know what I will do next. I may grab the coil packs. I've got some new bolts for them that look a little nicer. I bought from ICT Billet. Seems like the list goes on and on, guys. I know it's taken me a long time to get to this point, but at least it's getting some work done on it now. Now I've taken the coil packs off, and this is the new bolts that I'm going to be using, the shorter ones being the ones that hold the actual bracket to the valve cover. The longer ones are the ones that go to the coil packs themselves, but I'm cleaning them up as I go. I've started this one, and you can see how much nicer these bolts look, and they're not in the way. Now, will they be harder to reach if you have to remove this on the car? Maybe. But I'm gonna go ahead and get these guys in place, and then we'll grab the coil packs, clean those individually, and snap them on. I already cleaned this bracket and the wiring, so we'll just work our way around. Definitely looking better, guys. Got it all on, got it all cleaned up, as you can see. And I even went ahead and put my spark plugs back in a little bit ago, but I put my MSD wires on with the factory aluminum boots. And guys, the clearance on this kit is incredible. He did a great job as far as spark plug access and whatnot. So let's see what we want to put on next. We're getting close to taking it off of this, hooking it to this transmission down here. Next up is this guy. This is our coolant crossover. Now on the LS6 intakes, so like your 01 up Trans Am, which this is, you got a block off in the back. I am not going to be doing that. I'm gonna make my own. I have an extra one of these off a truck, but I do want to replace these gaskets, right? So you can buy these. There's a couple different versions. You can get like this style, and there is an O-ring style, which is what this takes. So I'm gonna pop these open. We're gonna replace the O-rings. I'm just gonna use a pick to pull these out, and we're gonna put this in place. You can see I got the new gaskets put in there. So these get torqued down to 106 inch-pounds. Well, it's not very tight, but it's also going into an aluminum head. And I tried to clean up the bolts as best I could. They look a little better. And then I used my wheel on my grinder over there, my wire wheel, to make the actual crossover tube a little shinier, kind of clean it up. They get, you know, just that gross look that aluminum gets. Man, I'm gonna run that down different, and then I'm gonna torque it to the 106 inch-pounds, not foot-pounds, inch-pounds. Similar situation back here. So look, this is off a truck, and so I'm going to use it for the back, and we are going to link this in to the front one and tee it off, so we're not blocking these back cylinders, those steam ports. I never have liked that, and it's proven to be an issue over the years. I don't think we'll have any problem. I may test fit my intake to make sure that we're gonna have clearance here. I don't foresee that being an issue. I've done this in the past. I've actually done it with another front one and had to bend it just a little bit, but I think this will work. So it's a good thing I test fit this. It is not going to work in its current form. It's touching, but man, not by much. Matter of fact, yeah, I think I can bend, if I can bend that without breaking it loose down here, I think we'll be able to use it. So I was able to bend that. I tried to hold this down here, and I put a little bit of a crimp there, but look, check this out. We're gonna go right underneath. That's gonna work perfect. So I started cleaning it off just to make sure I didn't crack it, and I don't see any cracks anywhere. We're gonna roll with it. So I'm gonna clean the rest of it off, make it look, you know, just as nice as that. You can see what I'm talking about, how it gets that kind of nasty, I don't even know what that is, just, you know, aluminum gets that. Now off camera, I have done a few things. You can see I've taped up some of this stuff, but I put a new idler on because I, for some reason, have no idea. I think my other one was on the motor that I put in my son's Camaro. Aside from that, I did have to buy a new one of these as well. I'll list it in the description as well, but I've got the oil cap on. So we're obviously gonna have to take the intake. It's just sitting on there. Obviously we needed that to see for our coolant crossover, but at this point, guys, here's my plan. I'm going to put the transmission up on these. I'm gonna take the intake off, and we are going to hook the transmission to the motor. We're gonna put the torque converter in at the same time. The only other thing I think I may put on here is I may go ahead and put the dipstick tube in place. It just threads through here, at least I hope it does still with the turbo manifolds. And so I'm gonna get that in place real quick, and it tightens down on one of these studs here. We'll get it in, and then we'll get this thing off with the cherry picker, and hopefully we'll get the converter over there in, sandwich this thing together. Here's what we need to do. We need to pull off, obviously I haven't taken the converter out of the box yet. Before we put the converter in, we need to put at least a half a quart of fluid in it. I've got a gallon over here. I'm gonna try to put at least a quart in, and then we'll put it up into place and try to get it seated. Once we get it seated, then we're gonna turn our attention to getting the plate in place. I've got the intake off. I'm gonna put the lift plate in place. We're gonna pull it off this guy, and we're gonna move it over and mate it up with the transmission. Now, what I'm hoping to do is go ahead and run the converter bolts in. So all I'm looking to do right now, sandwich these together so I can test fit, make sure we don't have any clearance issues. Then we're gonna pull it all back out, and I'm gonna put the wiring harness and everything on the motor outside of the car. It'll just make life a little easier. So either way, let's go ahead, get our Circle D Specialties torque converter out, get that fluid in that thing, see if we can get it in this transmission. The process of filling this thing is so slow. You can kind of rock it back and forth, but it's gonna take a little bit of time for that to drain down in there. Otherwise, when you go to put it up into place, you're gonna have a huge mess, and you probably will drip some anyway, but just so you guys know, take your time here. Now that we've let it get down in there, it's time to get this thing installed. So let's see if we can line some stuff up. Generally, you want to listen for a few clicks. No way I got it to line up first time. That's insane. I was trying to line up the openings. There we go. There's another click. Looks like it's way down in there. Generally, you want to listen for 3 clicks, but ultimately, guys, what we're looking for is, you know, you don't want it setting too far out, and you don't want what they call too much pullback. So we'll make sure of that when we are starting to mate it to the the motor. But now I think we're good. It's back quite a ways. We won't really know until we get the engine up against it to see how much pullback we have. But this is a converter that's built for a 4L60 to 4L80 swap, so I'm using the stock flywheel. I think we're good. And this is a billet converter, wasn't cheap. So now that we've got that installed, let's get this motor off this engine stand and see if we can get it over here. This is a little bit exciting, guys. We've got the motor off the stand, and we are going to attempt to get, since the transmission doesn't move, we're gonna see if we can get this guy over here. Hopefully it'll fit. We may have to come, looks like we're gonna have to come up with the transmission. Woo, those pipes are a tight fit. We'll get it lined up, hopefully started on those dowels, and we'll go from there. But at the same time we're doing this, we want to make sure that we're not having any issues as far as alignment with our torque converter. But I don't think we're going to have any problems. Ooh, that is really, really close to this transmission down here. I'm seeing a couple things we may have to trim right now. This, I may have to slide this clamp around because the end of it is hitting. That's the first thing I see. I'm gonna definitely have to do that. This clamp on this wastegate, the end of it is touching. So I'm gonna, I guess, unbolt it maybe and just turn it maybe just an inch or so. It should be good. I want to show you what I had to move on this side, this clamp right here. See how the threads are sticking out? Now, I probably could have cut some off of it, but I decided to just roll that clamp over, and now we're starting to line up on the dowels. It looks like our converter is working as far as fitment. What I'm going to do now is that we're lined up with the dowels on both sides. I'm gonna grab a bolt for the center up top, and start to pull the motor a little closer. Now, look, make sure it's threading in easily by hand. As a matter of fact, let's grab one here and start it, because here's what we don't want. We don't want it to be cross-threaded. So we'll get that started. I'm gonna have to have two hands, get that thing going, and then that'll start to pull it a little bit. But like I said, if it ever seizes up, and you also notice that I cleaned all my bolts out or off on my wire wheel. So let's get a couple of them started. Got 4 of them started. And so what I'm doing is making sure we're not cross-threading or anything crazy. I'm gonna start to drag this top one in first. We're lining up on the dowels, everything's fitting. There is no way on earth I think you could pull this transmission without pulling the motor. I just don't. I think it's gonna have to come as one unit if something ever happens. So hopefully we don't have any trans issues. There's just not gonna be enough room under that car. So really, I only need, let's see here, 2 more bolts, because the 4L80 doesn't have any, there's no bolts on the bottom unless I run that closeout panel, which I may. The other thing we're making sure of is the converter still spinning, right? So I can reach under here and make sure the converter's not squished up against the flex plate, and it's not. That's good. Make sure that you do not smash that. That kind of tells you if you're seated or not. But we're gonna go ahead and get these somewhat snugged up. We now have all the bolts in, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 if you're using the newer style 4L80. We need to torque these guys down to 37 foot-pounds, and then we can move on. So I'm gonna knock that out real quick, and we'll probably move on to the torque converter bolts. Now, in order to do the converter bolts, we're gonna need a couple things. First of all, I probably shouldn't have put my plugs in because it's gonna make it a little harder to turn the motor over with compression, but I've got an 1/8 inch drill bit here. And so that is about what you want as far as pullback on the converter. And you can see that it's kind of loose. So what we wanna do is I'm gonna run a spacer in conjunction with this, and they provide, Circle D provides a spacer. But what we need to do is we need to turn, we're only using the factory flywheel or flex plate here. So what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to turn it over. Even though this guy has 6 holes in it, we're only gonna be using 3 of them. It's completely fine, but I've got their hardware over there and their shims, which are just washers, to be honest with you. So we're gonna put at least 1 shim in there to get it into spec. Hopefully you guys can see that in there. I've got the washer in there and I've got it snugged up against this. I've got all 3 of them in, all right? So I've got that shim in all 3. Now, we need to torque these, but before I do, I wanted to roll this thing over. I'm gonna have to run them out, and I'm gonna put a little bit of blue Loctite on it that's supplied, and then we need to torque these to 50 foot-pounds, or 58, depending on your setup. But on this, we're going to 50, so I'm gonna have to move this out of the way. I kind of put this in the way to support the motor in case the ram gave out, because I went in. So now I'm gonna have to move this out of the way. We'll torque each one of these. Obviously we got the rollover or the breaker bar on the front. We're rolling it over, torque one, and I'm gonna go through that sequence twice. Once we got those all torqued down, we're ready to put the starter in. So guys, look, if you're doing this kit, you have to have a different starter. The factory starter I don't believe will fit. So it comes with a new plate from Heron Speed. He supplies you with this guy. So you have to take the one that comes off, and be careful because you're just threading it into billet here. He threads this. We got it installed, and now we need to use the bolts that are supplied with it to get it mounted up to the engine. So hopefully we can sneak this thing in here. Now, like I said, I wanted to try to do as much with the engine out of the car as possible. So we're gonna get that into place next.